If your expert advisor goes from the OHLC1 model to Realtek and collapses, it means you haven't found a strong edge in the market, you've simply found a lie. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why. Today we're going to take one of my systems, so a real system that I'm using, and it's a system I use on the DAX to trade it at night. Let's take this system and test it in OHLC1 and in Realtek and see what happens. And here, I'm going to show you something that hurts most automated traders. A well-made system clearly shouldn't change much at all if we change the model. Then we'll also do the opposite. We'll take the system and deliberately distort it in order to make it fail, working on noise, on nothing. And let's see how it behaves using one model rather than another. Welcome everyone, I'm Andrea, your automated trader, and if you like what I do, don't forget to leave a nice like. On the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next content we'll publish. There's something I see all the time in automated trading. There are people who are obsessed with this. Realtek, as soon as they see a backtest, if it's in OHLC1, no, it's worthless because it has to be done in Realtek or the opposite. People who think that just running a perfect backtest in Realtek is enough to have a great system. Spoiler? No, that's not how it works. Because the point isn't that Realtek is better than OHLC1. The real point is something else entirely. Does your system survive if you strip away all the illusions? That's the right question because Realtek isn't meant to make a system look good. Realtek is meant to expose it. And this is a huge difference because people use backtesting as a stage. I, on the other hand, use backtesting more like a courtroom, right? My backtest is supposed to try to destroy what I've created. Obviously, the backtest isn't supposed to make me feel good just because I see a curve I like. So if a system holds up in this kind of backtest that I do, then it probably has some value. But if as soon as you change even the slightest thing, your system collapses, then you haven't found a statistical edge. You've probably just found a statistical fluke, so now we're getting right to the heart of this video. This is my expert, the one that trades at night on the DAX. This expert is simple and straightforward. It doesn't use any indicators, it has nothing, and I really like it because it's based solely on time. So I do everything just by using the time frames. What does this expert do in broad terms? Basically, we open a position. When the session closes, cash, thank you, on the DAX, and we close it before the session opens the next day. So basically, we enter around 5 p.m. and exit the next morning before 9 a.m. Then obviously, it's clear that there are some contextual filters. Now, we're not going to look at everything in detail here. This is just to understand the difference between Realtek and OHLC1. So we don't really need the expert's logic in detail. So already here, there's a big difference between this expert and many experts you see around because this one doesn't use indicators, whereas usually you see experts with 100,000 indicators trying to grab 3 ticks in the so-called perfect spot in the world. And that's their trade. Here, on the other hand, we try to catch a fairly large movement because we stay in the market for many hours with a very significant stop because in this system I have a really large stop loss. So the basic logic is very simple. I enter at a certain time, exit at another time, and do nothing else. It's a clean and simple logic. Now, here comes this important detail that I mentioned earlier. Here, the stop loss. In theory, it shouldn't even be there. I should be working without a stop loss. But I always set a stop loss. You never know what might happen in the market. No, it's better to be protected. So I set a stop, a really large stop loss, over 3% of the index. And on the other hand, I don't have any take profit, so I never close the position for take profit. I just don't have it. I only close it because it's time to close it. So this is extremely important because our system practically never hits the stop. It's something exceptional. If it does hit a stop, which happens in the test once every several years, so it's not a system where you go, it touched the level even by 1 pip. I hit the stop and got kicked out. And there's the spread, right? All of this is eliminated in this system, so we don't have these issues. So the system, as it's structured, works on a very broad market structure. And this alone should make you realize something. If I work on a broad structure, ticks matter relatively little. But if I work on a very small market structure, ticks become fundamental. And today, we'll see exactly this. In this video, this expert is the twin of another expert I have, which works in a very similar way on the Nasdaq. I've also made a video about this, so if you want, go look for it. On the channel, there's the expert that works at night, so go check it out. There's also all the code. You can use the expert, copy it, modify it, make whatever use of it you want. Do whatever you want with the code. So one thing I want to emphasize before the usual wise guy comes along and says, oh, but you use data that's terrible, it's garbage, because you don't have all the ticks, you don't have all the data, you don't have 100% quality. Here I chose a period from 2024 up to today, where I have 100% of the data both in real ticks and in OHLC1, so we can immediately dismiss that excuse and you'll see it when we run the tests. So everyone quiet, no one spouting nonsense, because we're not here to try to sugarcoat reality. We're here in this video to try to understand just how robust a system is. So the first thing we do is run the test in OHLC1. What does that mean, OHLC1? It means that there are only the open, high, low, and close of each 1 minute candle. So we're representing the movement of our asset in a more summarized way, let's say. But on the other hand, when we run tests using this method, the tests are faster and less demanding to perform. So it's better. For a first approximation, it's better to do it this way, because we move quickly and waste little energy running the tests. The fact that this represents the price movement in a more summarized way is a big issue for many people, because everyone expects the system to work well in OHLC1, and then it performs terribly when you switch to RealTick. So for some people, the idea came up that, oh yes, OHLC1 is useless and RealTick is the magic wand, right? But reality is always a bit smarter than that, because it's not the testing mode that makes a system valid. It's the structure of the system that determines whether the test will hold up or not. So now let's run the test and see what happens. So we can see that the curve is a real curve. It's not a beautiful curve, it's a real curve, right? We have moments where it goes up, drawdowns, some sideways periods, then it goes up, it goes down, it goes back up, a real curve, that's it. And this matters a lot to me, because if I find a perfect curve that always goes up and never loses, I immediately feel like I need to check something, because I must be making a mistake, because I can't find something like that. I prefer to find a curve like this, where I have all kinds of moments, let's say. So now let's more or less remember the shape of this equity curve and look at where we ended up during this period. So we finished the period. Let's take the equity of 11,783. Now let's run the same test in RealTick and see where we end up. If we reach a value similar to this 11,783, or if we get a different value, if the equity changes, let's see what happens. I'll also show you the data so you can see 98% of the historical data, so basically a perfect history. Profit of 1,783. Let's remember this because we're going to compare it with what's in RealTick. So here we set up our RealTick. We use all the ticks based on RealTicks, the mode that everyone loves. And let's see what happens. Clearly, as you can already see here, the test is much slower than before because it's taking us much more time. The calculations are longer. In this case, it's still fast because it's a lightweight expert, so we went pretty quickly. So as you can see, the equity curve is almost the same as before. Visually, it has changed very little. I don't see any major differences. Let's see where we ended up. 11,780, so a profit of 1,780. Well, a difference of €3 over this whole period. Who cares? No, we got exactly the same result as before. Let's also take a look at the data. As you can see, 100% of the history, so again, nothing to say here. The broker's history is practically perfect, and the results are identical. So here, if the system were fragile, the problem should start to show up because we would have had a test in OHLC one way. And the test in RealTicks would be completely different because RealTicks are the model closest to real usage. Literally all the market ticks, so it's the most accurate condition possible for running my backtest. Instead, in our case, nothing has changed. And now here comes something important. Thank you. It's important because looking at these tests, I always say something that clearly bothers a lot of people, right? And what is it? It's that if you have a robust system, basically the influence of the broker you use, the feed, the data, the missing tick, they don't affect the system at all. Yes, they change it slightly because there's nothing that doesn't vary. But these are minor influences, small differences that in the end don't change anything when you actually use the system. Because like in our case, we made €3 more or €3 less, who cares? Maybe I run it on another broker and instead of earning 1780, it earns 1750 or 1800. In short, all the values are close to each other. There's not a big difference. And of course, if I get exactly the same results, then I start to wonder. On the contrary, it means I'm doing something wrong because it can't be identical everywhere. So at this point, someone might say, well, then you're saying that the data, the broker, doesn't matter at all. No, that's not the case. The data, the broker, the tick, these are all things that matter a lot. If you have a fragile system, it's because you're working with noise. So if you're working with noise, the tick becomes fundamental because that's exactly what you're working on. So if your system is well built, it won't break just because you change the testing mode from OHLC1 to real tick. It only breaks if your system is fragile. I'll tell you more, and this is where a lot of people get offended, right? If a system is well made, it doesn't matter if you enter 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later. For many, this is something inconceivable because everyone is used to extremely fragile systems. Sterile, hypersensitive systems, where? If you change even a comma, the system collapses, right? But this is actually quite serious because it means you're not working with a favorable market structure, but you're just working on a gap in the noise present in your data. And the noise clearly changes, moving from one broker to another, from one type of execution to another, from one data feed to another. And so, in the end, these experts will eventually blow up in your face. And let me put it even more bluntly, if your expert dies just because you enter, 5 minutes later you haven't found a statistical edge, you've just stumbled upon an accident. And this is the phrase that many should print out and stick on their monitor. Now, this naturally leads someone to ask a question. But why does your expert hold up so well and remain robust? Because it's well built. But what does it mean for it to be well built? It means that it doesn't depend on the tick, it doesn't depend on noise, it doesn't depend on micro movements, and it doesn't rely on unrealistically tiny targets. In short, it doesn't need a statistical miracle, but instead works on broader market dynamics, on larger movements, right? And above all, it works with time. Not with indicators, not with a lot of other things, but simply with time, which is one of the smartest things a person developing systems can do. Because time in the market isn't a random variable, it's actually a structure. The market changes its behavior depending on the time of day. There are times when large amounts of liquidity enter the market, times when institutional players exit, the time when a session opens, and the time when another session closes. The type of participant changes, and the pressure on the market changes depending on the time of day. This is real structural stuff and much more effective than a perfect tick. The tick, in most cases, is just noise, chaos, and a microstructure that's hard to use. And if you build something based on chaos, you have something that keeps changing and evolving. It might work today, it might work tomorrow, but then maybe you change broker, you change feed, you change execution, the spread changes, and then your system dies, you can't replicate it on others anymore. Feeds on other types of data. Because you hadn't found a structure, you hadn't found an edge, but you had found a coincidence, something that happened with that type of data. Now let's do something. Let's deliberately ruin the system. So now this is the best part of the whole video. Now let's take the system and what do we do to ruin it? We're going to modify the stop loss. Before it was over 3%, now let's set a stop loss of 0.10%, something really tiny, and let's see what happens. This way, basically, the stop loss becomes something minuscule. Just a breath from the market is enough to wipe us out. We're going to work with ticks in this case because it's very small, so we need to have all the ticks. So let's go to the tester. I've already changed the stop loss, and let's see what happens. Let's start with the OHLC1 test. We launch it. Right now, it's not important to see whether we gain or lose on the chart. That's not what matters. The important thing is to understand what changes. So, in this case, we've finished our test. We started from 10,000 and ended up at 5,981. All right, let's take our test and run it in real tick mode and see what happens. So let's see where we ended up. In our period, we have a completely different value. In fact, there's a difference of over 1,000 euros. So this means our test has changed drastically. It hasn't changed by just 1 to 2% or a little like before. It's a whole different story. Why did all this happen? Because we're no longer working with a market dynamic where you would say, okay, from the close to the next open. Often, is it a price increase? Here we're working with something very small because the stop is tiny, so the tick affects execution, it affects the feed, and probably if you move a system like this to another broker, and it doesn't work anymore because the prices aren't the same, and even the slightest change is enough to ruin everything for you. Let me put it even more clearly. If you need the market to move exactly as your backtest likes, tick by tick, in order to make a profit, you're basically already done for. So at the end of this video, we have two very clear scenarios in front of us. One is a system that is robust, the way I like it. Let's say when I develop systems, which is independent of the type of data I use, whether I use HLC1 or Realtic, it doesn't make any difference to me. If I test it on one broker, or another, the feed has very little influence and it's quite robust, so I can use it pretty much wherever I want. On the other hand, we have a system that has become very fragile, sensitive to the type of data, to the spread, to missing ticks, maybe in the backtest. It has become a hysterical system. I usually don't develop these kinds of systems because they're not my style. I prefer to discard them and move on. For me, during development, it's absolutely essential to have a system that I can use on whichever broker I want. So if I switch from one to another, almost nothing changes, or ideally, nothing changes at all. Whether I use OHLC1 or Realtic, or in any case that it changes very little. Also because I want to run tests in OHLC1 to make them faster and not waste time. And if I want to use the cloud, well, I also want to spend less, right? Obviously, nobody likes to throw money away. So now that you've understood that OHLC1 isn't absolutely bad and Realtic isn't the best possible option, I'll also show you how my expert performs over a longer period. Let's try it from 2020. Obviously, we'll do it in HLC because it's faster, and as we've seen, it doesn't make any difference. Let's take a look at our test. Let's say the curve isn't bad, it's not great either, it has its ups and downs, but all in all, it ends up in profit. If you want me to show you other systems in the next video that look amazing in the tester but then fall apart when you switch them to Realtic, write Realtic in the comments. If you found this video useful, send it to a friend on WhatsApp because that's how important information gets around. See you in the next video.